Allison, it's so lovely to sit down with you today to talk about the magnificent lives of Marjorie Post. Prior to writing this book, you'd written 5 other historical novels, many of them bestsellers. And I guess my first question would be, why her as the 6th?
Absolutely, thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you all for getting out here early and joining me. And I just flew in from New York last night, and so I'm getting the notices that there's ICE school closures for my little ones, and one of them got sent home with a stomach bug, and I'm like, well, I'm in Palm Springs speaking with all of you, so good luck. I'm thrilled to be here. This is my first time at this Writers' Festival, and I'm already just blown away. It is the best festival in America, as your father promised it would be. It truly is. I'm thrilled to be here. And we were saying Marjorie would love a gathering like this, right? Marjorie would have loved being in Palm Springs for this. So yes, I'm a writer primarily of historical fiction, really biographical fiction, inspired by these incredible women who were on the front lines of history, actively shaping history, and yet their names are not as well known. We know about the events that they occupied leadership roles in. We know about the men who were there, and yet we often don't know the names of these women. And Marjorie Post is the prime example of that. And so going back a few years, when I'd written The Trader's Wife and I had written the 2 Cece books, and I was looking for my next leading lady. And how I found each woman was a totally organic process. There's no formula. Like, I'm not like, okay, Trader's Wife was the American Revolution. I'm just going to stick with that and find the next woman. Each one I have truly been led to in a process where the story just gripped me and got its hooks in me. And it was compulsive. Like that, I knew I had met my next woman. And I knew that that was the story I had to tell. So I was living in Chicago at the time. I had a little baby, same age as your babies. This was a few years ago. And my in-laws also live in the Chicago area. They invited us up for brunch with friends they had in town from the Washington, D.C. area. And this guest of theirs who was staying in their home was a docent and a volunteer at Hillwood Estate in Washington, D.C., one of Marjorie's former homes. And my mother-in-law, being a good mother-in-law, had, of course, pushed all my books on this friend and all of her friends and made them all read them. And so this woman, Nancy Harris, who I thank in the back of the book, said, you know, I know you write about these women from history, and what do you think about Marjorie Merriweather Post, the woman who built Hillwood in D.C.? And I said, I'm sorry, Nancy, but I don't know anything about Marjorie Merriweather Post. I thought maybe the Emily Post etiquette book. That was when I hear Post. Or I thought maybe the family with the Washington Tribune, like the the Washington Post, rather. I said, I don't know anything about Marjorie Merriweather Post. So Nancy gave me just a few morsels, and she said, the heiress of the General Foods Company, the first U.S. ambassadress to the Soviet Union at the start of World War II, 4 husbands, all ended equally scandalously at the time, and really, really like a social, political, societal trailblazer. You should come to Hillwood, you should visit, you should just check it out and see what you think. You might be intrigued. So I took Nancy up on, I was definitely intrigued. So I went out to Hillwood, and I don't know if there are those in the audience who have been to Hillwood yet, but when you walk into Marjorie Merriweather Post's former home, really like a palatial home in Washington, D.C., it's like you're stepping back in time to get ready to attend one of her dinner parties. It's flawless, it's beautiful. Her daughter, Dina Merrill, said, it's as if mother could walk in and sit down to dinner here. It's still, you really get a sense of her spirit. Her clothes are hanging in her pink bedroom. The watercolors that her grandchildren, colored for her on the wall next to her, signed letters from Winston Churchill and Jackie Kennedy. And you really just, we can get more into that, but you really just get a sense of this woman lived life on this epic grand scale. And I was hooked. And I knew. I tell my husband, I'm like, when I know I've met my next book, I say, I've been bitten. I've got the bite. And then I become obsessed with this woman, which is sort of how it has to happen, because then I have to give the next few years of my life to researching and writing, and then hopefully the rest of my life talking about it. So I fell in love with her story.
And it's yeah, I mean, and she is fascinating.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's funny because we laughed because I had not really heard of her either. I thought she was part of the Manners
Yes,
family.
exactly, which she could have been. But.
She could have been. You know, and I think, you know, initially when you started talking, you know, those sound bites of, you know, these three big pillars of her life. I mean, there are many, but I'd love to start with that origin story of the heiress, you know, whose father founds, you know, General Foods. So will you walk us back to Battle Creek, Michigan?
Absolutely. So though Marjorie ended up known as America's Empress, building herself Mar-a-Lago as her winter home in Palm Beach, building herself the world's largest private yacht, bigger than, you know, the British royal family or the Vanderbilts or the Morgans. It didn't start out that way. Marjorie started with the most humble of origins, and really her story begins as a young, scared, poor girl rolling up with her family to Battle Creek, Michigan, which was known as becoming sort of this health healing destination at the end of the 19th century, and really rolling up with her father to kind of beg to get him into Dr. Harvey Kellogg's health sanitarium to try and cure her father, who was at death's door. And they used the last of their pennies to get C.W. Post, her father, a spot in Kellogg's Hospital Health Sanitarium. And Dr. Kellogg, which, if the name is familiar, it's Kellogg's cereal, and it came out of that SAN. They called it the SAN. Dr. Kellogg said, "I'm sorry, but there's really nothing I can do for him." C.W. Post was kind of a lost cause. He was left to sort of fade away. And we know probably now, over a century later, it was a mixture of probably a bad appendix, and also he had stomach ailments. They called it dyspepsia, malaise, probably depression, a nervous anxious disorder. He had, you know, in Dr. Kellogg's terminology, but C.W. Post, once he gets to Battle Creek, he sort of gets swept up in the movement and the sort of fanaticism for self-healing and sort of a healthy lifestyle to cure your body and spirit. He connects with the local Christian Scientist community there, and he really sees his story as he heals himself through more healthful eating. And he takes this product that Dr. Kellogg serves to his patients at the SAN called cereal, and he makes sort of his own spin-off product, and in his backyard with his little assistant, his 4-year-old Marjorie, helping him to mix the granola and mix the ingredients in these hot vats of food. And he takes this product to Dr. Kellogg, and he's so excited, and he says, you know, you serve this cereal to the patients at the SAN. Let's market this beyond the SAN campus. Let's offer this to all of the markets in America. And this could really be something. This could change the way Americans eat, this cereal thing. And Dr. Kellogg basically laughs him out of the room and says, oh, this cereal would never catch on beyond, you know, what I serve on this campus. And so C.W. Post, being this intrepid sort of trailblazing thinker, thinks, all right, well, then I'm going to take it and I'm going to run with it. So C.W. Post markets to America the first widespread breakfast cereal called Grape Nuts. And it takes off. You know, he bet correctly. Kellogg was wrong. He was very mad. He then hurries to get his own product with his brother out to the market, Kellogg's Corn Flakes, and they become lifelong rivals. And they both do quite well with this new concept. And so really from there, C.W. Post revolutionizes this concept of ready-made, healthy, convenient breakfast. Whereas before, the American housewife, you know, rose before the sun, stoked the fire, warmed the oats, or made the pancakes, or made the eggs. Now there is this quick, ready-made, convenient breakfast that people can afford and that is healthy. So the Posts really revolutionized breakfast, and then it's what Marjorie does as his only child, his heir, that she then takes that and applies that to every other meal of the day, to all sorts of facets of American life, like convenient laundry, convenient soap. But really her most iconoclastic idea, which she had, not her father, and which the business experts of the time told her was a flop, it was never going to work, was she got very intrigued by this concept of frozen and refrigerated food. She met this fellow, Clarence Birdseye, in Massachusetts while she was yachting. And he was experimenting on the cutting edge with this concept of freezing food that could keep. And she told her business people and her company, I really like this concept of refrigerated and frozen foods. I really think this could be something. And the men said, Restaurants don't want to serve food that's been frosted, was the term back then. No one wants to have a refrigerator in their home. Nobody wants to have frozen foods. And she said, I'm telling you, the American housewife is ready for this. The American housewife wants this. They said, no, no, no. She said, I really want to buy this Clarence Birdseye's company. They said, no, no, no. She doesn't give up. Years and years, she's hammering this concept because as a woman, she cannot make the decision for her family's own company. She's not on the board. Her husband has to take her family's seat on the board. She keeps hammering this idea. $10 million later, after Clarence Birdseye's stock has gone up, she finally prevails upon them. She says, we're buying Birdseye. They buy Birdseye. And if you have a fridge in your home, if you've ever had a cup of orange juice, not in the city of Palm Springs, but in somewhere warmer in the month of January, you have Marjorie to thank. She truly changed the entire American way of life, the whole diet, the way we think about meals, the way we think about having access to food when it's not literally being grown fresh at the exact season. She changed life for everyone. And so that was her. So her company just continued to grow under her expertise and her wisdom and became this booming empire that then afforded her this lifestyle.
And when you were talking about the kind of origin story and then fast forwarding to kind of the behemoth of the Birdseye, could we just take a step back and within that you said there was a moment where she found her voice, right? So it's Battle Creek, Michigan, that American dream. They start making money. Dad brings her to the Northeast. CW is like, you need to be in Greenwich. We need to be part of the establishment.
Yes, exactly.
She's kind of put into a life that maybe not so happy about. But trying to acclimate into a man's life. And then in her 20s, becomes parentless, and then becomes, potentially the sole heir of this big company.
Absolutely.
Will you walk through that moment, right? So she's in her 20s. Her dad kills himself, the guru of wellness. Imagine what 1918.
Yeah, exactly. She's an orphan.
How unusual is that set of circumstances for a woman to be in?
Absolutely.
And how does she deal with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so her father was really her hero and sort of loomed larger than God over her whole childhood. He had made the impossible happen. He had cured himself. He had cracked open this new American empire. She had started with him gluing the labels in the barn, in the back in Battle Creek, and riding around in the carriage with him to sell these first products, by hand. And so he was really this huge figure in her life. And so once the company really starts to take off, it's as you said, they have the money, but they don't have the pedigree. And they're in Michigan. And so CW Post says, really the power is out east, DC, New York, New England. And so he does. He moves Marjorie out east. They settle in Greenwich, and he wants her to go to the right schools and meet the right people and sort of enter into this world that was known then as the 400. There were like 400 families that Lena Astor was willing to invite to her ballroom, and that was really where the power was locked and held. And so Marjorie and CW move out east, and they have like these millions because of their cereal empire, but they're kind of seen as outsiders and these arrivistes. And so Marjorie makes a great match. She finds one of the heirs of the 400, Ed Close. He apparently falls in love with her at first sight, proposes to her 4 days later. She's 16, they get married, and what could possibly go wrong, right? So it's happily ever after, right? No, she had 4 husbands, so this was not her happily ever after. But it's during this time, really, she had almost a century of life, and when you watch the arc of not only American history, but the role she played on the vanguard of American history, it's really a story of evolution and growth and empowerment, and we're not there yet when she's a teenager and in her early 20s. When we see her in her early 20s, it's really the Downton Abbey era. It's Edwardian. She is expected to be a socialite and a hostess and a bride and a mother, and that's it. And the husband will take the seat on the family corporation, and when CW Post commits suicide, it's really the husband that's expected to step into the role. And when CW committed suicide, as you said, it was shattering and it was gutting, because here's a man who has built an entire empire on wellness and health and making the right decisions and eating the right foods to heal your body and your mind and your soul. and his body, mind, and soul are ravaged to the point where he admits defeat and makes, the ultimate loss for Marjorie. To make things worse, when he committed suicide, he's sitting with this huge empire. Marjorie started as a young girl, literally packaging the boxes of cereal with her, literally his right-hand person at all times. They were so close. He had remarried later in life, and he left half of the empire to the loathed stepmother. Marjorie and Lila did not get along. So that was pain upon pain and betrayal upon betrayal for Marjorie. So you really see this formative moment for her in this moment where she steps up. She says, that is my business. That is my family. That is my birthright. I launched that business with Daddy sitting on his knee, supporting him. And she goes to war to get ownership of the company. And that's really one of the first moments where you see her sort of stepping into her power. And then as the years go by, as the husbands come and go, you see that sort of strengthening and that forging coming in grades. So she doesn't start off as a feminist. She doesn't start off as an empowered woman. She doesn't start off by saying, I'm taking my seat on the family board. It's really an evolution. And so for me, ultimately where I landed with was, there are many love stories in this book. You could argue that the relationship with the father is the great love story of her life. You could argue that some of the husbands are the great love stories. People have differing opinions. But really, ultimately, where I landed was this is really the greatest love story here is the one she has to forge with herself as a woman, as a leader, as an individual. And the working title I had, actually, when I started the book was, I Am Mrs. Post, because every divorce is shattering and heartbreaking in its own way. But each time you see her growing stronger, and she's going to be okay. And she's going to grow, and she's going to go on to something even better from this. And a friend made the joke to her after her third divorce, 3 times around the track now, but it's back to the post. And for me, that's what it kept coming back to, is finding this inner voice, this strength, this core character, where she really was this incredible, remarkable woman who changed things, even as the vicissitudes of life kind of ebbed and flowed with beauty and heartbreak. She held both of those things.
Yeah, no, and I love there's certain inflection points in the book, like, when she realizes that the house is put in her name,
yes, because she made that mistake.
She tells her first husband she wants to move to New York, and she kind of starts advocating for herself, and I really see that also as, it was really beautiful to see kind of post the death of her father and kind of fighting for everything that was rightfully hers.
Absolutely.
But also if you can touch on, so the structure of the company was such that, it was left to her. Ultimately, Lila did give her ownership of the company, and she did run it, but she had to have, she couldn't tell anybody, right, that she was running it. She had to have her husband or her uncle running it. So those barriers were very real, but she absolutely brought that company to the bazillion dollars it was when it sold.
Exactly. And that's an evolution, because at first it's the husband taking the seat, and then it's the husband taking the seat, but her sort of pulling the strings behind the scenes and working through him. And then by really the 30s and the 40s, when you have President Franklin Roosevelt in power, and he's got, a powerful first lady, he's got a woman in the cabinet, and it's sort of it's the dawn of World War II. People can read what's coming. Marjorie really finds a power and a voice in that moment where she, they're friends with FDR, they're friends with sort of the power players in DC at that point. Marjorie's living in DC, and Marjorie gets the assignment to serve as the first U.S. ambassadress to the Soviet Union.
Husband number 3,
Husband
right?
number 3.
It will pass by
Davies.
number 2. Let's go straight to number 3.
Number 2, who was the inspiration with her for Great Gatsby. So it's definitely worth getting to know him too, because scandal. But husband number 3, they're given this incredible opportunity to go to the Soviet Union because everyone can read the writing on the wall that Stalin's not great, but Hitler is worse. And if we're going to go to war, it's likely going to be with the Nazis and with Germany. And so as bad as the USSR is in terms of how the US is seeing, the pieces on the global map, they wanted to really neutralize or befriend the USSR because the only thing worse than the USSR was if the USSR sided with Hitler. And so FDR says, I will send the walking poster child for capitalism, Marjorie Merriweather Post, to Moscow to be a walking billboard for the wonders and successes of the American way of life. And what does Marjorie do? Well, what do you do when you get posted, and you have to move from Mar-a-Lago and Palm Beach in January to Moscow? You sail your yacht, of course, right? And so she loads her yacht with frozen foods, fruits and vegetables, coolers of food, toilet paper. She brings her own toilets. She brings carpets. Yeah, she brings her own bathtub. She brings all of the splendor of Mar-a-Lago and her other homes, generators, and she lands in Moscow. And she completely is like, we're going to change everything. We're going to fix this all. She completely rewires the diplomatic house, Spatso House, so that there's electricity and running water. And she opens up the house to the foreign diplomatic community and the Russian commissars and their wives. And it's this goodwill tour where people said, we have never seen anything like this woman. And wow, America looks like the place where we want to be. Because if this is how she's eating, coming into Russia in a state of famine, and she's offering them vegetables and fruit and ice cream, and she's entertaining in this style, she really did a lot of goodwill for the US and was really, it was great PR for the US. But it was this wild time to be in Russia. First of all, she had spies living in her attic, and she knew it, but she couldn't acknowledge it. They knew they were being listened to. They knew they were being followed by the KGB, the precursor of the KGB. But they were there on FDR's personal invitation to make friends with the Russians. So she befriends Molotov and Litvinov and her husband, and they're working behind the scenes to sort of foster this friendship with the USSR. But the USSR has just recently murdered their czars and their imperial ruling family. And they are in a famine, and they are absolutely broke. And so they have sacked all of these palaces and churches and aristocratic properties. They have plundered all of this treasure, centuries worth of treasure. Catherine the Great's tea sets and portraits, Anastasia's personal items, wonderful, wonderful, beautiful Fabergé eggs, religious icons. They have them all just sitting in warehouses under tarps, collecting dust.
True?
This is all true.
This is all true.
Okay, and they were willing to sell all of this aristocratic treasure to anybody who was willing to buy it because they attached no significance to these czars that they had murdered. They were, a religionless, kingless state now. They were Soviets. So Marjorie was interested, and Marjorie had the money, and so she would literally go through these warehouses of Russian treasure, and it was 1 ruble per gram. So it was a strict formula. And if you had the money, you could have Catherine the Great's imperial portrait. So she gets it. Or Anastasia's tea set. So she really became this singular figure in the Western world to acquire the largest private collection of imperial Russian treasure. And so she came back on the Sea Cloud with all of this priceless treasure, and it's still in Hillwood, it's still in her home. And it's really incredible, but that she was there at this moment in time that you wouldn't see again.
Gosh, and walk us through a little bit of that collection, because there is that great moment in your book, and I know it's fiction, but it so speaks to that time where the Russians are just so disbelieving of what the West looks like.
Right,
and this selling, just the total unimportance of all of these historical gems.
Yeah.
And in a way, she's preserved them now.
Exactly.
And they're here. And I know that there was a bit of controversy around, who has ownership, but the state legitimately sold them. There was no funny business.
Exactly. She bought
proper
it
ownership from the government, which is so crazy.
And I think it goes back a little bit to what we touched on earlier, where Marjorie had the money, but not necessarily the pedigree. And I think a large part of her life was sort of buying her way into this upper echelon of society.
Because Washington was quite brutal to her, right?
Absolutely.
So
she was an outsider.
Right.
Yeah.
So she was an outsider.
Yeah.
When did that change in Washington?
Absolutely. So at the point when Marjorie moves to Washington, D.C. in the very early days of the FDR administration, there was really an old guard. There was a political insider clique that Marjorie was just not a part of.
Even though she's wealthy, she's
No.
Successful business.
It was more about like who you knew, how long you had been there, what your connections were, and she really came in with very few connections. And you see her in that position time and again.
Yep.
Everywhere she goes, she sort of comes from this stance of outsider needing to break in. And every time she does, because she just could win people over with her sheer force of nature, personality, and her goodness. She was an incredibly decent person too. But so you see her in Russia sort of scooping up all of this treasure, but that happened all over. She bought Napoleon's jewelry that he bought for his Empress Louise, so like these diamonds the size of small pieces of fruit. She had Louis XVI's furniture. She really became an avid purchaser and just aficionada of great art because she could afford it, and she knew that that lent an air of class and elegance to her lifestyle. And so her homes are like walking museums. Another really significant moment for her as an art collector and as a builder was in the construction of Mar-a-Lago. Because Palm Beach was really not the place to go when she started going there. If you were from the East Coast, and you were one of the 400 and the old guard of New York City.
You're not summering in Palm Beach, or you're not wintering in Palm Beach.
Yeah, maybe they went to Europe, or maybe they went more in northern Florida, but Palm Beach was this barrier island outpost, and they joked that the mosquitoes were the size of birds, and the roads were dirt roads, and there wasn't good shopping. And so Marjorie was really on the vanguard of this set of New Yorkers who were going down to Palm Beach and making it a fashionable winter spot. And so Marjorie she said, I haven't been in New York the longest. I don't have the most prestigious circle in Greenwich or New York, but I could really make a name for myself in Palm Beach as the doyenne, the hostess of the Palm Beach winter season. And so what does she do? She goes down to Palm Beach, she scouts land, and she says, Marjorie was a planner. She didn't do anything by half measures. So she said, I don't want to get wiped out in a hurricane, so I'm going to build on top of a reef so that I can connect my home by steel to the reef, so I know we're not going anywhere. I want views of the sea and the intercoastal, and she wanted to just blow everyone away. So what does she do? Does she hire the in vogue architect that all the millionaires are using to build their Palm Beach homes? No. She hires the stage and set designer for the Ziegfeld Follies, Joseph Urban, who is known for these fantastical sets and magic, really just transporting people to these other worlds. And she has him come down and design this wild place that is unlike anything anyone has ever seen in Palm Beach before, and she names it Mar-a-Lago. And she really does become a pace setter in the Palm Beach set. She helps to build the first hospital down there, because she's like, if I'm gonna be in Palm Beach and something were to happen, I want a hospital, so what do? You build a hospital. So she really set up this, this new sort of clique that went down and became Palm Beach winter people. And so her legacy still looms really large there too. But she did that with every place she went. She sort of walked in and was like, how can I make this my own? And then just redid the whole thing.
Oh my gosh.
Largest private yacht too.
I was going to say the Sea Cloud, right?
Yeah, the Sea Cloud was larger than the ships that were used by the British royal family or the Morgans or the Vanderbilts. She would entertain in grand style on the Sea Cloud. She would sail the world. Camp Topridge, which she built up in the Adirondacks as well. And yet, what I will say is, she had the fortune. She could buy Napoleon's jewelry. She could buy Catherine the Great's art. She could build herself Mar-a-Lago and the Sea Cloud. But truly, where I always got the sense that she was the most fulfilled and the most inspired and empowered was when she was serving causes larger than herself. You almost even get the sense in these periods of incredible self-luxury and self-indulgence that it's like this restlessness. Totally. And really where she pours herself in with the greatest conviction and focus is in moments like when she funded the largest hospital in wartime France during World War I. And she outfitted this entire Red Cross operation in France for the soldiers. Or when she opened the largest food canteen on the Lower East Side of New York City during the Great Depression. Or when she gave the Sea Cloud, her yacht, to serve the U.S. Navy during World War II. She said, since I have no son, I will give the Sea Cloud. So you see, yes, she lived like a queen, she lived like America's Empress, but she also poured her energy and her talent and her resources into really wanting to make the world a better place and seeing problems and finding ways to help solve them.
And she also ended up giving Mar-a-Lago, right,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to the White House.
So this is wild. So Marjorie was a planner. So she planned what she was going to do with her estate, and she was so philanthropic and charitable in every sense. So she left Camp Topridge in upstate New York to her good friend Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York at the time. She left it to the state. She left Hillwood to be a museum because she really wanted to share the treasure she had collected and the art, and she really wanted to make it available to the public. And then she wanted to, she left her Long Island estate where she had thrown the Great Gatsby parties for F. Scott Fitzgerald. She left that's Long Island University. Beautiful properties, all of them. And then she really wanted to leave Mar-a-Lago to the federal government to be the winter White House.
And that was her idea.
That was her idea. And they reviewed it. It was the Johnson administration. She courted them. She hosted them. She laid out all of her plans. And it got as far as it needed approval by the Department of the Interior because it would have been a park. And they said, sorry, but the U.S. government cannot manage this property. So what Marjorie could do as a one-woman show, the federal government couldn't take on. So it's just interesting to see how that has evolved. But yeah. So Mar-a-Lago, which is a huge club, was her private home, which is just staggering when you see the scale on which she lived.
So if we could talk about her husbands.
Yes, her husbands.
Because
her many
each
husbands.
one was, she had 4 husbands. Each one ended in divorce.
Yes, which was not done. It was not the done thing.
Say, and she's this kind of, like a real good girl.
Exactly.
A Christian scientist, a big philanthropist. Like you said, she's a worker in a way, which is so unusual.
Yeah, right.
And 4 husbands.
And 4 husbands.
So will you just walk through Ed, Joe.
Ed and Ned.
Will you just walk
Joe
through? I mean, what?
And Herb.
What?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Anything about what was
that? Great question. Great. So a woman in her time.
How unusual is this? How unusual is
a woman like her did not get divorced once, let alone 4 times, and so it was really scandalous. And as you said, she was a rule follower in many other ways of her life. But everyone asked this question of her, right? Why the divorces? And she said, in my life, I have had many wonderful things, but in love, I have never had any luck. Ain't it hell? And one of her advisors said, Marjorie, you could have run the State Department. You could have run U.S. Steel. Like, you are a woman who can do anything. Why can't you keep a husband?
But like, do you think because of that time period, her position it just wasn't going to work with a man?
Well,
if that makes sense.
I think for sure there was an extent where no man could keep up with her, and she had the wealth, she had the talent, she had the life force that people did observe made the men around her feel smaller because she was so much larger than life. First of all, and I'm not a psychologist, so this is just me having immersed myself in her heart and trying to absorb the stories. First of all, I think it would have been hard for any man to compete with her father. I think that was so complicated, and he was such an outsized influence on her that I think that then makes it hard for her to see other men falling short of how she had built up her father in her head. But I think if you follow the breadcrumbs from husband 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, it makes all the sense in the world in the moment in time, in the batch of circumstances that she was dealt as a young girl, with her parents' marriage falling apart, with the chaos that was left in her father's wake. It makes complete sense why an Ed Close would have been an attractive figure to her. He was security, he was stability, she was 16, her brain wasn't fully formed yet, and he was madly in love with her. And he was Greenwich, and he was solid, and this was where her life was going. And so it made sense. And then you can see how once they get into it, it's just not working. And I'm not going to say more than that because then you don't have to read the book. But you can see sort of that she's strong enough to understand she needs a way out of this. Then you can understand why she fell in love with Ned Hutton. And Ned Hutton was
Dreamboat.
The family members, the grandchildren, they tell me he was really the love of her life. Yeah. And the tragedy is that she was the love of his life. But Ned Hutton had a hard time with monogamy, and that was shattering. That was shattering to her. But the two of them were a force of nature. They were rumored to be the inspiration because they were hosting F. Scott and Zelda in their home on the Gold Coast. They were rumored to be the inspiration for the parties of the Great Gatsby. You've got the beautiful, wealthy heiress and the self-made man who is aspiring to be good enough for her. And that was when she built Mar-a-Lago. That's when she acquired Birdseye. That is when she built the Sea Cloud. She really came into her own as a queen in that moment because Ned and she were this force of nature together, and everyone loved them. That's when they were hanging out with the Ziegfelds and Billy Burke and Mary Pickford and sailing the world and going to the English royals' coronations, and they were like these jet setters before there were even such thing as jet setters. But you can see why that marriage falls apart, and then you can understand. And again, I won't give too many of the specifics, as you can read and find out. But then you can see why Joseph Davies would have been such an attractive palate cleanser.
Stand-up guy.
Yeah. So you have this debacle, shattering, scandalous end of the marriage with Ned Hutton that's like all of society is watching, and it's tawdry, and the court papers have to be sealed because it's so scandalous. Her maid, all that's true. The footprints and the talcum powder on the floor, the strings on the bed, like that was all true. She
Buy
got
the book and read it. It's riveting.
It's all true. It's all true.
Riveting.
And so then you can see why Joseph Davies would be an attractive next husband, because he's friends with FDR and he's a mover and a shaker in the diplomatic world, and there's really exciting stuff going on in the world. And at that time, he was expecting to be posted to London or Paris. He didn't know Moscow. And she was like, I could go abroad and be a U.S. ambassadress. And they had a really interesting and I think fulfilling partnership for a time. But then, as I wrote it in the book, it's really true how that fell apart and why that fell apart. And what you see happening, I think, over and over again is these men getting jealous of her because they just can't keep up with her. And she really runs the show. And she has the money and the life force and the dynamism to do so. And so then you can see why husband number 4 was sort of an attractive rebound, for lack of a better word, from 3. And so you can see how each one makes sense in the moment based on where she is geographically and emotionally and all the things. And then they each fall apart for 4 different reasons. And she could not have foreseen how husband number 4, how that would fall apart. That was probably the biggest scandal of all. Yeah. And she was shocked when she found out what he was up to at Mar-a-Lago. So just a little teaser. But you know what? She was a hopeless romantic. And she was taunting her children until the end of her life that she was going to get married again. And she said that she believed that love was the thing. Without love, none of the beauty and the grandeur and the glamour mattered. She wanted someone to share it with. And so I think maybe a flaw of hers was that she threw herself all in too quickly, because every single time she gets married, it's like after a few days that she's known the person. So I think maybe we can say that was her flaw.
I was going to say,
reading people and jumping all in, maybe without vetting them properly. Because who wouldn't want to marry her?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then legacy of the Post family. Where are they now? Because I know they sold. General Foods gets sold. It's part of Kraft.
Yes.
She passes away. I think she had a good relationship with her children.
She did. She had so she had 3 daughters. Dina Merrill was her youngest daughter. I don't know if anyone in here is a Dina Merrill fan, but very funny story. I was writing this book as I was expecting my 3rd child. And every time Marjorie had a child, she thought it was going to be a boy, right? Because there weren't ultrasounds back in her day. So she kept thinking, back in the day, it was like, you have to have the son, you have to have the heir. And so she had a daughter, and then she had another daughter, and then she was pregnant with her 3rd, and it was Ned Hutton. It was really the love of her life, and they thought his son had passed away under tragic circumstances, and so they really thought they were going to have a son, and they were going to name him Ned Jr., And then the baby comes out, and it's a girl. And they don't have a girl name picked out because they had Ned picked out. So they named her Nedinia. And so Nedinia turned into Dina Merrill. And I said to my husband, I was like, we really thought, I felt so sick with my third one. I hadn't felt sick with my earlier two. I was like, I really think this is different. I really think it's a boy. She comes out, she's a girl. I was like, well, Dave, we're not having Devinia. This is where the life imitating art, until you start buying me some of Marjorie's jewels, that life is not imitating art too closely. But she had really great relationships with her daughters, and she split her fortune among all the different museums, and among her girls, I think they all did just fine. And then the grandchildren are very much still around and involved with the museum. One of Dina's daughter, whose name is Nina, she said she loved the book, but it was very awkward for her to read about her grandmother's sex life, which I think. But then their great-grandchildren are also incredibly invested in the family history and the legacy of philanthropy and really like the family legacy. And so one of the great-grandsons, his name is Cole, because Dina married the Colgate family, so his name is Colgate. So his name is Cole. He's really the family historian, so he digitized all of the great family videos of like Marjorie and Ned Hutton swimming in the pool with baby Dina Merrill, and times on the sea cloud and in their homes. And it was really so beautiful and romantic and evocative to go back into the world in such an intimate way. And so when he was reading the book, I was super nervous because I was like, he knows this stuff. And this is really deeply personal. And I had never had that experience. When I wrote about Benedict Arnold, I got like Facebook messages from people in Canada who said they were, the distant relative of Benedict Arnold's. But this was immediate history. This was people who were in the room for some of the moments when I was writing these scenes. And so it felt incredibly like this high bar that I really wanted to honor and do justice to the story and the history. And so when Cole was reading it, he came to one of my first book events in New York City at the Gramercy Arts Club. And he walks in and I start sweating and I'm okay. And at the end, there's Q&A for the audience, and he raises his hand and he asks for the microphone. And I was like, okay. And he just said, we as a family just want to thank you for bringing a spotlight to Mummy Da, was what they called her. And Mummy Da was grandma, and then, for him, his grandma was Dina Merrill, but then their grandma was Marjorie. And just honoring her life and telling her story to a new and broad audience, because it's, as you said, you don't have to make any of this up. Her life was actually that outsized and outlandish. And that is the best raw material for historical fiction, is when the facts are just that good and juicy and dramatic.
Thank you for saying that. So real life is stranger than fiction.
Exactly.
We have a couple minutes, and I was wondering if anybody had a question for Allison. Oh, yes, up there.
Both of her parents suffered from depression. Is there any indication that she ever suffered from depression?
That is such a great question. We were speaking about this before. No. So Marjorie's mother was constantly traveling to places to seek cures, and she was constantly bedridden. And by modern standards, we would say depression and migraines. She would be laid flat by headaches for days. And so a century later, kind of us diagnosing, we don't know exactly what the specifics were, but we can sort of infer based on how it was described. And Marjorie just had a very different experience health-wise. She was always robust. If anything, I think she skewed in the opposite direction, where people said she didn't really show vulnerability. Even in these horrible low moments, she would kind of go into hiding and retreat on her yacht or in her palace or wherever, and then she would emerge full and ready to sort of conquer the world again. And so who knows if that was sort of a reaction that she had as a girl and as a young woman, but she was a robust woman who sort of always presented to the world the picture of having it together and treating every day as if it was going to be the best day. And she really kind of expected that from her staff and her household and her children. And she was really described as not ever showing those chips in the armor, those chinks in the armor.
We've got, yeah.
I just have enjoyed this so much.
Thank you.
My friend and I were on the Sea Cloud.
Oh my goodness, the yacht.
And I was actually in her private suite.
Wow, amazing.
And it's more of a back east ship.
Yeah,
Not so many
yeah.
Californians
Yes.
went on that. It
Yeah.
was more the Windstar.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you. This is
Oh,
wonderful.
absolutely. I will end on that note because I know we're running out of time. When I had the opportunity to go up to Camp Topridge, her estate up in the Adirondacks, the cabin that was hers is still preserved as she left it. Her hairs are still in the brush. There is a safe that they have never cracked. They don't know what's in there. You see her bathing suits and her hand towels from earlier husband's initial monograms. And so I spent the night in her home, in her cottage, and it was so wild because I felt like a security guard was going to have to come and usher me out at some point. But when I woke up that morning and the view, it's the Adirondacks, so it's preserved. It's as she would have seen it. You look out the window and you hear the loons on the lake and you see the mist and you see the mountains and you see this place that was so meaningful to her. I sat there and I just said such a prayer of thanks for her life and for her inspiration and her strength and everything she did, and just wanted to do her life story justice.
Allison Pataki.